Like many Disney movies, Avengers Endgame threads the needle between age groups, trying to offer a solid story that youngsters and adults can appreciate, but also adding enough mom and pop jokes to keep mom and pop engaged. Avengers Endgame had plenty of things that went right over kids' heads. Spoilers ahead. After the 5-year time jump early in the film, we see Captain America leading a grief counseling group meant to help people move on after Thanos' snap. With half the living creatures in the universe gone, there are a lot of issues left unresolved. All the surviving Avengers are struggling to move on after the weight of a crushing genocidal loss that's beyond alien to most kids. Adults, on the other hand, are more likely to key into what are obviously some largely unhealthy coping mechanisms for the Avengers' loss. Of them all, Tony is the closest to moving on in a healthy way, but he's done so by moving as far into the country as he can so as to never engage with the wreckage of his biggest heartbreak. He's deep in denial, to the point where he kicks the Avengers out when they try to convince him there's a chance to make things right. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that both Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame are built on father issues. You've got the ultimate abusive big dad in Thanos, who tells everyone he meets that his genocidal warpath is all for the good of the people he's killing, that he's actually being the good guy by doing the bad thing for the right reasons. Then you've got Tony Stark, who struggles with being a father figure for Peter Parker, and for whom the latter's death weighs heavily enough in Endgame to lead Tony to undertake a mission through time to bring Spider-Man back. Then there's Thor, who often struggles under the weight of his own father's expectations. Basically, a lot of the Avengers are working through their dad issues, which is crystallized in a long moment of Tony talking to his father, Howard Stark, while on a mission through time in the 1970s. Tony manages to have a pretty in-depth heart-to-heart with his old man, even though Howard has no idea that he's actually talking to his son. Tony finally gets to work through some of his feelings and admit that Howard was a pretty good dad underneath it all. It's the kind of perspective that you're not likely to get unless you're well on your way to becoming a dad yourself.
What is and always will be my greatest creation is you.
When Thor and Rocket go back to Asgard to get the Reality Stone, the God of Thunder pretty immediately gets sidetracked when he sees his mother Frigga. Thor remembers that the day they're visiting Asgard is the same day his mother dies in the past, which brings up some understandably complicated emotions for him. Frigga finds him, however, and they're able to have one last loaded conversation about family, the future, and the burden of expectations. It's the kind of perfect last conversation that many adults wish they could have had with their parents after they've passed. That level of melancholic fantasy isn't common for most kids, thankfully, and the opportunity for Thor to have one last chat with his doomed mother likely put more than a few adults in the audience to tears. Real people don't have the ability to go back in time and get closure with their parents, but plenty have dreamed of the chance. While Captain America has been leading therapy sessions and Natasha has been leading superhero teams, Thor has been leading New Asgard, at least in terms of alcohol consumption. The massive amount of alcohol Thor's been drinking has given the God of Thunder a bit of a beer gut, which leads to a handful of fat jokes throughout the rest of the movie. He's clearly dealing with depression and grief, and it's led him into a destructive lifestyle that's radically changed his body. Kids may or may not recognize that Thor's newly rotund figure is a product of beer drinking, and they certainly aren't going to clue into Thor's decision to look for a way out of the emptiness of his life at the bottom of a bottle. When it comes to time travel in movies, things almost never make sense for very long. Most of the time, these movies just kind of ask you to accept the basic concept and ignore anything weird that happens later. Endgame, however, spends a lot of time calling out various misconceptions about how time travel works in the MCU. Movies get involved when Rhodey and Scott Lang list off some of their time travel favorites: Back to the Future, Hot Tub Time Machine, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Star Trek, Quantum Leap, Time Cop, and The Terminator. Most kids aren't going to have seen more than a couple of movies on the list, and they rattle them off so quickly that even adults might have trouble keeping up. Still, even if you were quick enough to recognize the films and remember each one's specific rules regarding time travel, it doesn't matter. Hulk pretty quickly shuts Rhodey and Scott down immediately by telling them that they're all wrong. After Scott finally escapes the quantum realm thanks to a helpful rat, he has to alert a security guard to let him and his quantum realm doohickeys out of the storage space they're being held in. That security guard is played by none other than Ken Jeong, who's previously worked with the Russo brothers on the series Community.
And a 1, a 2, a chang 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 4.
The cameo alone might be enough to mention here, but there's one more detail in that scene that's just for adults. The security guard is reading J.G. Ballard's The Terminal Beach, a collection of science fiction short stories. One of the most famous stories in The Terminal Beach is called Endgame. It doesn't bear many similarities to the film, but the shared title is certainly no coincidence. If you thought there was something vaguely familiar about Thor's hair, beard, and sunglasses, you weren't the only one. Tony Stark noticed too. For a good chunk of the film, it seems like Chris Hemsworth's Thor is taking style lessons from Jeff Bridges' The Dude of Big Lebowski fame.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know?
The R-rated cult classic from 1998 isn't a movie that most kids are going to be familiar with, but Endgame isn't content just to leave it as a visual gag. When Stark calls Thor Lebowski in passing, it takes the quick gag into meta territory. Bridges played both the Dude and also Obadiah Stane way back in Iron Man. Stane was Tony's business partner and eventually his supervillainous rival as Ironmonger. That Tony is the one to call Thor out on his resemblance to one of Bridges' less villainous roles is icing on a cake that's just for the adults in the audience. Just because it's a serious mission doesn't mean there's not a bit of room for levity. Ant-Man and Iron Man certainly take that to heart when they journey back to 2012 along with Captain America in order to get some of the Infinity Stones. Both Tony and Scott take a moment to critique the past version of Captain America's hindquarters in his Avengers-era getup. Ultimately, Scott proclaims it to be America's ass, which is hard to argue with. Later in the film, when present Cap is fighting past Cap, he takes a moment after the fight to admit that he really does have America's best butt. It's clear in just about every scene, but that rearward-looking dialogue is likely to fly right over kids' heads, albeit with some giggling that one of their favorite heroes just said a mild cuss word. Meanwhile, the adults in the audience are likely to feel a bit called out for staring. Check out one of our newest videos right here, plus even more Looper videos about Avengers Endgame are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.